Good. So the floor is open, please, for your reactions, your comments. I can't answer any questions, of course, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't talk. But the floor is open.
It was a wonderful expose of the dynamics of the spiritual exercises. I couldn't agree more with it. What I was hoping for more as well is the connection with the dynamic of the liturgical celebration, perhaps. I may share an experience. When I entered the society, I was very involved in the parish, cathedral parish, with the liturgy. Already had. And I entered the society thinking that I had to give up my spirituality, the liturgical spirituality that I had received, which I'm very always grateful for something else. But I knew I was called to be a Jesuit. It was only, I think, reading a text, after I made the exercises, reading a text of Joseph Gélineau on the connection between the exercises and the liturgy, which he did. And I have not found that text again, but I know I read it. And that gave me a sense of hope that I was in the right place and that the exercises and the liturgy were not contradictory, but the exercises helped me to enter more into the liturgy, and the liturgy as the spirituality of the church was also complementary to the exercises. So what I found, I wish Eric had said more about the liturgy, the dynamics of the liturgy, and how this first UAP, it was implicit, but I didn't hear it clearly. I don't know about anybody else. But if I were to continue that, I would do it, bring out the liturgy.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Actually, Eric has given us 4 discussion questions. I'm going to put them up on the board just before we start to break into groups that really do try to help us to make that transition. So I think that's a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I may find the texts you're seeking on Gélineau and the spiritual exercises. I may have it on my computer, but I'm not sure. But I want to stress some link and some questions also between the liturgy and the spiritual exercises through my own experience in a house of exercises. First, something struck me when I studied Sacrosanctum Concilium, when it's spoken about liturgical year. And at the number 102, something like this, it said that the different mysteries of the life of Christ are, in a way, being represented or rendu présent, said in French, through the liturgical year. And it's very powerful to think about the theology of the liturgical year in this way. And I see a strong connection with what is lived during the process of the spiritual exercises, particularly the 30 days retreat, when you go from contemplation to contemplation of the parts of life of Christ. One of the questions has been, should we leave the 30 days retreat during the end of Lent and beginning of Easter time? And the third week during
Holy Week.
And fourth during the first week of Easter. I've never seen this. I know it has been done, but I would say it's 2 different paths. And what I can stress also through my experience, it's with the exercises, you've got a way of personal spiritual life, and you go to your rhythm. With the liturgy, it's mainly, I would say, particularly for the Holy Week and afterwards, it's ecclesiastical way. We are all together and we are going at the same rhythm. You mentioned 2 days ago the arguments between French and Belgian Benedictines and Jesuits in La Revue Les Études at the beginning of the 20th century. Is liturgy a prayer or not? Well, what I can say is that it's very important that during retreat we have strong and good liturgy. We should not seek for a strong communication between the text of the liturgy and what is prayed, but it roots the spiritual exercises in a church experience. And that's something very, very important. At the end of the booklet of the spiritual exercises, you've got this, les règles pour avoir le vrai sens de l'Église. I don't know the English expression. To have the true sense of church.
Thinking with the church. Rules for thinking with the church.
Yes. And the spiritual exercises cannot be done outside of the experience of church. And I would say liturgy celebrated each day, at least the Eucharist, but maybe part of the liturgy of the house sometimes, roots us within this church experience. And it's very, very important. That's fine.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's excellent. Before Rock speaks, if I may just add on to what you just said, much of what you just said is very well expressed, and it was well expressed, is very well expressed in an article by Peter Fink, who is a member of the Jungmann Society, on liturgy and spirituality. And it deals precisely with some of those issues. I might add that my own first long retreat in novitiate, our novice director was very keen on the liturgy and liturgical reform. This was 1969 to 71. And our long retreat did occur during Lent, and then the fourth week was Easter week. And it did seem to gel, although I agree with you, it doesn't have to happen that way at all. It's not necessary at all. But Brock, please.
At this point in my life, and it could change tomorrow, what I perceive is that the movement of the principle and foundation and the first week is related wonderfully to the relationship established by standing and singing at Mass. I'm getting a phone call. Think about this. How long, if we were to say or sing the glory to God, how long could you or could I maintain attentiveness to God before the list I make and the concerns I have and what's that idiot doing over there and what's that praise eventually opens the door, the trap door to the first week. where we get to show ourselves as self-involved and self-protective. It's through praise, reverence, and serving God our Lord with Christ in the Spirit toward the Father, in that relationship, so that, at least for me, the relationship that's established liturgically falls apart nicely because of my own self-absorption or self-concern. And here I am in the first week, called back to praise. That, I believe, is the experience of a Jesuit is a sinner, beloved by God, and sent on mission. So that the Lord have mercy. You, let's see, you have come to call sinners. Lord have mercy. You have come to, you are the Alpha and the Omega. That outward focus like that drive will elicit our resistance to being attentive to the other as you and I lapse into self-concern or criticizing others. And so, at least that seems to me a relationship between the vector of the first week and the vector of the opening rites of the liturgy. There, when we sit down, we might know that we need to hear a saving word. Yeah, just a thought.
Thank you. Thanks. I think Adam Lalonde.
I just had a simple question. I liked Eric's sort of comparison between the annotations, of course, and sort of one's attitude towards the liturgy, particularly the Eucharist. And I think it's annotation 15, and he's referring to let the creature deal with the creator and the creator with the creature. I just think there's a lot of fruit for reflection there, and be interested to hear from sort of proper liturgists who've spent years reflecting on this longer than me, and certainly as a sort of baby priest, as it were, only 1 year since my ordination, but just about the idea of showing the way to God and sort of taking on that leadership role as a presider, and how that incarnates between sort of a kind of sense of rigidity, as it were, the sort of the rubricist approach, the worst word that a Jesuit can fling at another Jesuit, to be a rubricist, but also the idea of being faithful to the text as to permit people to enter more easily into the liturgy. So I guess what I'm saying here is I've often struggled with the idea of being creative and helping people and not being rigid and all that with regard to the liturgy, but also awareness that there can be a real abuse that takes place, because the presider is the only one that has this power to change things. And sometimes it's the familiarity of the liturgy in which people are more easily able to enter into it. So certainly after many years having attended liturgies where people were a little bit too creative, sort of destroys that sense of prayer being able to enter in, where all of a sudden we're sitting when we should be standing, we're standing when we should be sitting. There's 3 homilies where I expected 1. Those kinds of things. And where people are, and I don't mean to criticize too much, because sometimes people are genuinely trying to make the liturgy relevant, but at the same time, sometimes the liturgy just kind of speaks for itself, so that becoming transparent, letting the creature deal with the creator, seems more often to me about kind of just following the usual pace and flow of the liturgy and letting it be, only making changes when need be. But I know it's a controversial question, and I'm just very interested in, again, wiser elder minds, sort of what they think of that kind of thing.
when one of my students asks me a great question like that, I usually say, I hate you for asking that question. I think we will discuss it in the groups. I think that'll be a real part. I think it's embedded in Eric's discussion questions. I mean, I could go on for half an hour about that, and I won't. I think Paul and then Charlie.
If we are going to in the groups, that would be good.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's really a major part of the discussion questions that he set for us. Yeah.
I just had this observation: is this UAP is showing the way to God, and I'm thinking of Sacrosanctum Concilium, paragraph 2. Is the liturgy is the privileged means where the people of God manifest the mystery of Christ and reveal the real nature of the true church. And it seems to me that, manifesting the mystery of Christ is the mind, the heart, the life of Christ that leads to a self-offering. That's showing the way to God, which is Jesus' path to God. And then secondly, the real nature of the true church is that when we follow Jesus into this self-offering at the table, we're drawn into that unity, which is the body's true identity, which is communion, through him, with him, and in him. So I think paragraph 2 is indicative.
Thank you. Charlie? Oh, sorry.
This is just a response to Adam, since I'm not in his group. Even though I don't meet your criteria of more experienced, wiser priest, but as a relatively young priest, one thing that helped me was thinking about and remembering that the Eucharist is one of the sacraments of initiation. And there's a formative value of the Eucharist. The Eucharist forms us. And particularly as a priest, I've found that it's my responsibility to be formed by the rubrics, to be formed by the rite itself, so that I can pray it naturally, and it is my prayer, but that I need to let myself be formed by that, so that it's not like I'm doing somebody else's thing, or I need to express my creativity because I'm something different than this. This doesn't express, but that I need to be formed so that, my peace be with you is me genuinely wishing that, and that becomes my language in that context and so forth. So if that helps you at all, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Tony. Charlie? Wait for the thanks.
I think we need. I value this group, the plenary, because the connection between the exercises and the liturgy is really important, and we have to articulate that. And we're starting to do it, like what Paul just said there, and what Tony. I'm not sure we're going to do it in small groups. Somehow we're not coming together again.
Okay.
I really want us to.
Okay. Okay. I think I hear you making a plea that we remain in the large group. And if that is the sense of the body, then, of course, we're talking about adaptability right now, right? If that's the sense of the body, do I hear any? I get a sense that that's what we'd like to do. Okay. We're not going to separate into small groups then. Okay. But this does prejudice a little against the languages, but I think that's the sense of the group as far as I can pick it up. Great, let's do it. Adaptation is the heart of whatever, running a meeting. So if I can ask Marcin to get I'll get the questions. Oh, there they are. They're up on the board. So I think these will help us, especially number 2 and number 3 are particularly what we've been talking about. We don't have to take them in order. But I think these will help us to deal with the questions that are bubbling up through us. I think, Jerome, you want to... Bruce hasn't spoken yet. Oh, can you make the text larger? Thank you. With the mic, please.
Mr. requests, if we don't stop to go to a group of languages, could we make a break now? It's 1 hour and a half, we're together, listening, etc. I think a break could be fine, and then we'll resume all together.
Let's get started because I know a number of us have to leave at 5:30 to practice the music for the Eucharist so that we can celebrate well. So let's get started, and the floor is open. So can we have the four? You don't need to see me on the screen. Can we have the four? There we are. Okay, super. So you've got the questions in front of you. I don't think we have to deal with them in order, but whatever you want to do. So I thought that the second and the third, at least by my initial glancing at them, were the ones that kind of responded to the fiery question that Adam raised. So, and I'm going to try to shut up because I can just go on forever about this. So, please, Andrew.
Thank you. A while ago, I wrote an article on Pope Francis as a Jesuit liturgist and what difference it made that the Pope was a Jesuit in liturgy. And I looked at how he celebrated liturgy, and my key focus was on the ministry of the Word. And it seems to me that the spiritual exercises are also one of our most profound and most powerful ministries of the Word. And it, in a way, the way that it changes us as Jesuits leaves its mark on us as celebrants of the liturgy. And I think there is a qualitative difference, or a difference of some kind, between a Jesuit who has been through all the spiritual exercises for their whole life, celebrating the liturgy, and someone else who hasn't been through 30-day retreats, 8-day retreats every year, Jesuit Ignatian spiritual direction, and so forth. And that is that in the whole manner of our being, we are profoundly shaped by Christ. And that, as I said to a retreatant once who was going to be ordained, when they're looking at you, the congregation, they're not looking at you, they're looking for Christ. And they're looking for that experience of Christ in your presiding. And so we have a thing called Jesuit liturgy, which is celebrated by Jesuits who've been through the exercises. And I think we do not only have a sense of Christ active within us, which is an experience of love, but also of Christ present in the assembly, which is also an experience of love. So the attainment, the contemplation for the attainment of love is therefore an experience, a liturgical experience. And that has very much affected celebrating Mass now for 30 years. So it's never dull, it's never by rote, it's never boring. There's always some sense that something is happening, and that liturgy is an event, and it's about event, not about objects. And that's really shaped my experience as a Jesuit liturgical celebrant.
Thank you. Please.
I was going to share. I recall in tertianship, with the spiritual exercises, the Ignatius' intent that one would make an election. And starting the 30-day exercises as a tertian, wondering, what Christ might call me to, or panicking about this election question. And I remember it was within the context of the Eucharist, that one of the daily Eucharist during the exercises, that one of the presiders, spiritual directors, set us at ease. Christ has already called you to be Jesuits. What you're here to do is to deepen that call. And I wonder, with respect to question number 4, if we don't see a parallel here between the spiritual exercises and the liturgy, although most Jesuits may only make the exercises twice in its 30-day form, Ignatius asks us to make the exercises every year. This spiral, this deepening of that call, the call of Christ to follow him in the company of Jesus. Isn't that true in the liturgy, in the Eucharist? That the Eucharist is, for us, the ongoing, repeatable sacrament of initiation, deepening our baptism, our identity in Christ. This question is related, this notion, this thinking is related to my ministry with young people in a university context. In the spiritual exercises, initially Ignatius invites the exercitant to come to know Christ and to hear Christ's call to them. I find with young people today is we need something like the spiritual exercises to invite young people to come to know for the first time. I'm meeting young people who have no prior experience of faith or religion of any kind. Almost to return to the liturgy, what we need is almost, or at least I'm imagining, something like the rites of Christian initiation for young people. Because the liturgy presumes already baptism, already that initiation into Christ. And I'm finding with young people with whom I work, it's prior to baptism, or if they have been baptized, they've become disconnected, disenfranchised in many ways, loss of any identity. So anyway, the question number 4 leaves me with a lot of questions, but I do see parallels between the spiritual exercises and the liturgy.
I think this is in response to number 3 about creative fidelity, and then what, Adam, you were saying about your comments about creativity. I find it interesting the way that the question is structured when it talks about the exercises arose as a pre-modern response. And, I think that creativity in and of itself also has a pre-modern connotation too, modern and pre-modern. And I want to say that it was Avery Dulles who wrote about this in a very short article about innovation and creativity, where he spoke about how, we think of creativity as like a very modern thing, that we have to invent something new. But he was drawing our attention to creativity as something that's really ancient, an ancient biblical idea, which, he emphasized this idea of participation. Participation in God's dream, in God's vision, which participation is, that's so liturgical, and so, I'm just responding to, wanted just to add that.
I think Dennis.
I was taken by Eric's comment, maybe side comment, about music and the fact that for somebody to play a piece well, he or she has to study the original text of the music and then make it his own or her own in the performance. I think when people do adaptations of the liturgy or adaptations of the exercises, sometimes they don't study the original and then make it their own. We have all these directories through the ages early on how to adapt the spiritual exercises, but it starts with Ignatius's text and says, how is this appropriate for this particular person? I think when one takes music, and for 11 years I took violin lessons, so I have had some background in music, but when you have some piece of music and you can make it into something creative, if you create too much, then you get a different piece. You don't have the original. It loses its foundation. But I think the adaptation that we do with the exercises in adapting to people, but it is faithful to the flow of the exercises, the dynamic of the exercises. I think the same sort of thing, it really applies to liturgy too. How do we make it our own for this community, but we realize that it is the same liturgy. Period.
Thank you. Jérôme?
Go on with some reflection about the third point. In 1999, with a group, we started what became in Paris La Messe qui prend son temps. Mass, it's a nickname. Formerly, it was a Mass hearing the word of God. And young people said it's Mass qui prend son temps. Takes his time. And joke is it takes your time. So what's this Mass? It's a normal Mass. It's for young people. But there are two readings of the Gospel. One with a microphone by someone in the faithful in the congregation, and there is a kind of reflection. Then, after the proclamation of the gospel, points are given, and there is a 20 minutes silent time for all the young people to pray with these 2, 3, 4 points. Points, you say it in English, les points, okay. And then, because it was young people, a little sharing group, we could develop this because it was before 2004 and Redemptionis Sacramentum. So, not the bad page. But it works, and it's still very alive 20 years afterwards, more than 20 years. And we had to think, but maybe we didn't go very far in this reflection, the link between personal prayer and liturgy of the Mass and, what are the link between personal prayer when you're praying alone and when you are in the Mass? There is an interconnection with La Messe qui prend son temps, but there are some questions. So I think that the exercises can give us a creative fidelity within the liturgy. It's an example. But giving 30 days retreat now, I see that for the spiritual exercises, the one doing the spiritual exercises should enter into a frame. He should deal with this frame. And it's not so easy. And if he wants to escape the frame, it's not. It doesn't normally announce good things during spiritual exercises, particularly the 30 days retreat. And the frame is an help. And I would say also same thing with the text of the exercises. I'm keen on giving the text of the 16th century. And it appears to me that with a lot of people, even young people, it works. It works. And I don't have to adapt. If I would adapt it too much, or if I would take some adaptation, it will be the exercises of Father Jerome or Father, what's his name? But not the one of Ignatius. It's another frame. And the spiritual director of the exercises doesn't need to seek something to be lived by the one who is doing the retreat. He's giving the frame. And then it's the creator with his creature. So I make a parallel with liturgy. The frame is given. We have to deal with the frame. And we have to open this events of relationship between God and someone. But we cannot, well, I would say it's very tricky not to be manipulating the frame. If not, it won't be any more an event, but an object I would put the hand on.
Thank you. I think Charlie would like to, I don't know whether it was Tony or Charlie first. Charlie, then Tony.
John and I were talking about this at the break. One of the questions which I don't know if it's there is the question that the celebration, the liturgical celebration, is the celebration of the church, by the church. To add to what you said, Tony, we become, that's why it's initiation, we become the church, Henri de Lubac. We become the church, and the church makes the church, the liturgy makes the church, and the church makes or does the liturgy. So the tension I feel sometimes is, with some fellow Jesuits, is that it is a private devotion. I'm the priest, and this is my devotion. And I want to say, it's not. It's prior to you. This is the church's, and we have to enter into that with the help of the exercises. I know that was my experience, making the exercises at the beginning of my Jesuit life. I entered into the liturgy with so much more. I was so grateful. But I've always said the liturgical spirituality, or is the spirituality of the church that is prior, even to Ignatian spirituality. And we have to, I think we have to say that clearly to Jesuit, and I don't always hear it. I think I feel it in many ways, and it's our celebrations. I'm not criticizing celebrations we've had, but I don't know if anyone else feels that tension, but I do.
Can we go to Pasquale first, because he hasn't had a chance to speak to us? Pasquale Cebollada from the Curia, who is the postulator general of the Society of Jesus. So, Pasquale, this is our chance to welcome you. I know you're going to speak with us tomorrow, but you are benvenuto. You're most welcome.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation. Unfortunately, I can't be the whole time with you all this week, but anyway, I'll be today and I'll be tomorrow in the morning and also in the afternoon at the final Mass and your final dinner. Well, no, I mean, I come from the exercises. I worked on the exercises. I taught spirituality. I taught on the exercises and so on. I don't come from liturgy. But hearing what you're saying now, I said, of course, I agree totally, because in the exercises, we are being shaped by the text and the spirit of the exercises, both of them. At least in our tradition, text is very important also. Of course, it's not a text that it's an end in itself, the spirit of the text, but rooted in the text. And it's not my text, as you said. It's Ignatius, but it's the church's text in the exercises. I guess in liturgy it's the same. I mean, I am shaped by the text and the spirit of liturgy. Thanks God. I don't have to create new things. I mean, try to understand what I'm saying. Of course, you have to be creative, but within the frame, as Jerome said. And this gives me a great liberty. This gives me freedom. My decision, my election, which is in the center of the exercises, is not only mine. I am at the same time being elected by God and being chosen by God. It's not only me. The same in liturgy. I mean, this is what I wanted to say because I agree with many things you are now saying.
Thank you, Pasquale. Tony, we made you wait.
I'm in some ways just echoing those other things and building on them. A lot of times, being the Jesuit studying at Sant Anselmo, whenever those debates between Festagé and Navatel would come up, people would sort of look at me out of the corner of their eyes. So I've sort of felt an obligation to start to think about, the relationship between the spiritual exercises and the liturgy. And I think one thing that's important for us to keep in mind, which is echoing the last two comments from Pasquale and Charlie, that Vatican II's teaching that the liturgy is the source and summit of our faith takes priority over the other, our universal priorities, all the other sort of our Jesuit documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that when we think about the exercises, it's helpful to think that the liturgy is the source in some sense. And I do think that, for Ignatius, there was the liturgy, participation in the liturgy, a sacramental formation was the presupposition before you even got to be able to do the exercises. And I think about the instruction that not everybody would be capable, ready to go on to the second week. And I think in particular, if you haven't been formed with the sort of incarnational, sacramental imagination and sensibility that comes from having participated in the liturgy, really getting what's happening with the sort of imaginative prayer of the second week is problematic. That I think there's the real risk if those presuppositions aren't there that the exercises can just become make-believe. And I think that's something that we probably, as Jesuits, have to emphasize more and more clearly. And then that it's the summit, that what we're doing, I mean, in some ways, the universal apostolic priorities and everything else we do should be leading back to the liturgy. It should be leading back to participation in the Eucharist. And sometimes I think the temptation for me, for others, for us, is to think of the liturgy as sort of, to ask how can the liturgy serve our priorities, and to instrumentalize it that way. And I think we fall into that just naturally. And I think we have to force ourselves and remind our brother Jesuits that it's the opposite. The movement should be in the opposite direction. Ask not what the liturgy can do for the universal apostolic priorities, but what the universal apostolic priorities can do for the liturgy. So that source and summit, I think, could be helpful.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Tony, you've made me think of something I think was mulling around in my head, but now it's becoming a bit sharper. And that is what a different world Ignatius inhabited. I'm thinking of the third question, the exercises arose in a pre-modern response to a spiritual need in the church. I've always been arrested by the fact that Ignatius waited a year before he celebrated his first Mass. So when we talk about Source and Summit, I don't know if Ignatius would know exactly what we meant. I mean, I want to emphasize the adverb exactly. Yeah. Because people moved around in a building while a priest said Mass. And pulpits, as we tour, as an American, I tour around Europe and teach students with photographs. They're halfway down the nave because there were no pews, and everyone, well, y'all clump over here and hear a homily. But at the same time, someone's teaching catechism to kids over here, and there are 4 priests hearing confessions. And then up at the main altar, jingle, 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 is the alarm call. He's going to start doing the consecration. So I think of all that difference, and I wonder, I'm just raising the differences, and wondering, genuinely, because I don't know, to what extent then I'm not a historian, did Jesuits or did Ignatian spirituality affect and effect Mass moving in more fully into the Baroque era? I don't know. I'm ignorant of this stuff, you know. But I'm not ignorant of this because I'm of an age, 40 years in the society this summer, of continuously, this is going to sound like a complaint, it is, having to listen to the priests older than me rehash the stories about what their formation was like, or what it was like to run St. Mary's Hall in Boston College or something, where the regents working there are sitting in the middle of a chapel watching a priest say Mass while 8 other Masses are going on at the side altars, each side of them. So we are really, I think, in a very creative period that Ignatius couldn't imagine. And we remember Bob Taft, and I know John Baldwin. This has also come up in a form of question about, well, why is it that Jesuits do not celebrate morning prayer, evening prayer together, right? Tafty did an essay, I think, from the first meeting in Rome in 2002 about the point. So again, now I'm an old dad, so just to tell some of the younger people that I'm just thrilled to see here, you guys. But Taft was pointing out that the world of prayer for Ignatius and the initial companions and all was very different, right? That for Ignatius to say we're not going to be bound to choir stalls, Taft was arguing, and I think Baldwin was augmenting, if I may, I think, is to say we're in a very, very different situation, and it's a both and. So I'm really grateful, because you made me think of those things again and bring them up. Those are observations. I'll stop.
I'm going to step out of the chair for a second. And to add one thing, I wish we had some Protestants here. That is to say, there's one word, and I think it links profoundly to both the exercises and to the liturgy, and that is the Bible. Those of us who are familiar with Gordon Lathrop's work, which I highly recommend, I don't know if it's been translated, but Holy Things, then Holy People, Holy Ground, it's a trilogy, but especially in Holy Things, Lathrop talks about how the liturgy incarnates the pattern of the Bible itself, which always takes something which was old and puts it in a new situation. For example, Isaiah recapitulates the Exodus, which recapitulates the creation. And he says the liturgy does exactly the same thing. Well, the exercises are profoundly biblical. So I'm not sure I am enamored of the language that Ignatius uses, but they are profoundly biblical. And I think one of the best things that was done in the last, 60, 70 years was David Stanley's biblical approach to the exercises. If I ask my students, whom I teach my theology students, what are their most important courses, they will without doubt immediately say they're Bible courses. And that's fine. I mean, I think they should be their liturgy course, but no, not really. They're Bible courses because our faith is so profoundly biblical, and we have, I would say, a very developed understanding, appreciation of the Bible today. And I think that's one way of bridging our concern with our spirituality, Ignatian spirituality, which always must be biblical, or else it's not Christian. And our liturgy, which is profoundly biblical. My mentor, Aidan Kavanaugh, used to say, people, the Protestants used to criticize us for not having biblical liturgy. They didn't take a look at the liturgy itself. It's profoundly biblical from beginning to end.
I just have a brief response to that, John, is, the whole dynamic of the contemplations and the meditations. You say, after hearing this, then I consider how I might respond. Offering myself and all that I am, take, Lord, and receive. That's the proclamation and response of the liturgy. To hear the word and be committed to it and then offer oneself.
Bruce again, please. Yeah.
As long as there was a pause, I'll jump in. Because the other point before the stimulating comments to which I spoke immediately, and Andrew is walking away, and Andrew inspired it, but that's okay. You're being confirmed in your opinions, Andrew, in your report. But is that we expect, I think what happens for us is related, both the biblical content John just mentioned, which is so true. Allow me a little bit, a footnote first, though. I live and I work at Vanderbilt University and in Tennessee. I have about 8 or 9 spiritual directees, only one of whom is Catholic. All of them have done the exercises in different ways before they met me. They get it, biblically, yeah. But the other thing is that the word is an event. And I think the Ignatian exercises, one of the creative gifts God gave through Ignatius was that, and again, loving the point you made, Kevin, it wasn't that this was new per se. It's deeply in the tradition that God events in prayer and liturgy. But Ignatius received a very original way. I think it affects us, some of us at least, Jesuits, how we celebrate liturgy is we really expect the event to happen. I think Andrew worded it one way. I wanted to think he thinks like I do. But that he was saying, I interpreted or related to as, when I celebrate, preside at, liturgy of whichever rite, not just Mass, any rite, I'm really expecting God's going to reveal something, and through the people. And there are things that help me learn that from my education at the Jesuit school in Berkeley back in the late 80s, early 90s. Jack Boyle, a man named Jack Boyle taught New Testament. But he also gave us, who were approaching ordination, a series of classes on preaching. And what Jack emphasized, which I thought was so delightful because he was a Bible scholar, was he's saying, you don't just start talking about, what I got out of these readings was. Would that people had that, But rather he said, you've got to always contextualize what a genuine homily is. Go, Jack. And he even emphasized seasons, which affected me. Like, what is God doing over an entire liturgical season? That's an event, too. The other teacher was Jake Emperor, who used to be actively with us. Jake is pushing 90, I would think, and can't get around. But in a course I had on practicing the rites with Jake, he emphasized that, he said, you don't prepare a homily on a basis of an idea or a bunch of concepts. What is your operative symbol or image? And that really affected me. And I think there are real deep Jesuit sensibilities in that, because in my experience of the exercises, there is so often in movements, an image emerges, and there's that Ignatian principle. You don't move off of it till it's done. And I think for a lot of Jesuits, myself for sure, but I think I've experienced it with others, when people say there's a different quality of how Jesuits preside or provide liturgy, there are intrinsic things there about expecting an event, not just doing something to provide something, but rather, in this sense, it's the dogmatic constitution on revelation, which is truly revolutionary, again, in the Second Vatican Council, revolutionary for a church that lost it. Dei Verbum makes clear, revelation is not words on a page. Revelation is the event that arises when God, works through the Word and we receive it. So I appreciated Andrew's point and just thought I'd add those other things that elders no longer much around with us had given me.
Thank you. I think Mark is telling me that our time has come to an end. Thank you. I want to thank, Charlie's gone, but Charlie and Adam for asking the kinds of questions that made us realize that we needed to speak in a group, and Charlie for then standing up and telling us that it was better for us to have this conversation this way. So thank you very much. Thank you all. I think, and we all owe Eric a wonderful, great debt of gratitude for helping us, stimulating us to talk about these things. And they're obviously so dear to our hearts, right? Because we're men of the exercises, we're men of the Bible, we're men of the liturgy, and all these and men of the church, and all these make a great difference to us. So thank you. On to celebrate the Mass. I'm going to preach with great fear and trembling.